And we're live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Samantha Salmon, National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. And today, we're closing out our Diabetes Awareness Week series with a crucial conversation about how adverse childhood experiences, aka ACEs, shape long term health, including diabetes risk. Trauma, stress, and systemic challenges don't just impact mental health, they influence metabolic health, inflammation, and even how our bodies regulate blood sugar. So I'm so excited and honored to have a special guest with us today, Miss Cendie Stanford, founder of ACEs Matter, an organization dedicated to educating communities on childhood trauma and its lasting effects. Cendie, welcome to the show. Ooh, you're on mute.
I'm unmuted now.
So, thank you so much for joining us. I would love for you to explain to all of us, since your organization is called ACEs Matter, just give us a brief introduction. What are ACEs and why do they matter?
Thank you, Miss Samantha. I'm gonna start off by trying to capture the way I understand ACEs as a civilian. I'm gonna skip past my titles because the titles that I earned with all the education that I had the privilege to have access to, a part of me feels like they don't really have nothing to do with the work that I'm doing now. But as a civilian, as a person who grew up in poverty, grew up around a lot of what is the buzzword now called trauma. I didn't have the language for it back then, but it turns out that I knew what ACEs were when I could speak, like when I learned how to speak as a child. And I was born in 1977, if anybody just like wants to get a visual of that, what that looks like. When I say I knew what they were, I knew they existed because I used to come home from school and unfortunately there sometimes wouldn't be enough food to eat or clean clothes at home, or the washing machine was broke, and because we were in an environment where the adults in the home were living from paycheck to paycheck, there might not have been money to even wash our clothes sometimes. I also knew the language of ACEs as a kid because sometimes my mom would be in relationships with men who were really nice to us, but unfortunately they weren't very nice to her. And they would do things to her like fight her, abuse her, talk really bad to her. And as a kid, I didn't understand that thing that I was experiencing with my mom and her relationships with men would later on be tied to a name that I'm going to share with you shortly. I also didn't know that because my brother was involved with drug dealing and he was also like playing around with gangs back in the day. I didn't know that actually had a name either. And I didn't know that when he got killed the day before my 16th birthday, that would also be a part of the work that I'm doing now. So when people ask me what are ACEs are, I start by giving examples of what my childhood was like.
Mm-hmm.
And if people can hear that, sometimes people may internalize it personally and be like, oh, yeah, I recognize that. I kind of went through that in my childhood too. And then there are people that may not recognize it because they didn't have to experience it, but maybe they see it on TV. So, adverse childhood experiences, it's an abbreviated term called ACEs. And it's really the things that many of us, as a matter of fact, more than 60% of the American population have experienced at least one of them.
Wow.
If I wanted people to be able to talk about ACEs without having to know all the science, the one thing that I would want people to know is that ACEs are like childhood bullies and they're invisible by the time we become adults. They are, according to the Center for Disease Control, now that I'm a civilian and actually know that this organization existed, I'd never even heard of them until COVID happened, right?
Mm.
When COVID happened, I learned that the Center for Disease Control had put out this robust study, and they were looking at adults and asking adults about experiences from their childhood. And what they discovered was the more trauma and adversity, like growing up in a house where mental illness was diagnosed or undiagnosed, growing up in a house and you're a child having to see an adult struggle with mental health issues was something that they now call an adverse childhood experience. Growing up in a house where somebody struggles with substance misuse is an adverse childhood experience. growing up in a house where mom and dad or mom and sister, mom and grandma, any type of emotional or physical violence that a kid's five senses are witnessing, is called an adverse childhood experience. And it happens to be 15 more of those categories. The first three I just named, the mental illness, the substance misuse, and the domestic violence. Those are just three of the 15 that have been studied, well studied for decades. And basically what they say is that these invisible bullies, even though we can't see them in adulthood anymore, if we experience them in childhood and we kept experiencing them and there was no buffers involved, meaning like therapy, support systems, interventions, it means that our body on the inside, which is why we call them invisible, our body ended up creating these toxins and these chemicals in response to what the senses recognized as stress. So, adverse childhood experiences are invisible bullies, and I call them bullies because they happen to us as early as the womb, when our moms were pregnant with us, up until, they say with the study, 18, because up to 18, from the womb to 18, everything is new to us. We're developing. And so our body is recording these experiences so that it can recall them later if it senses something that is familiar to it, even if it's wrong. If it reminds the body of something that happened in childhood, then your adult body will respond in likeness. And you may not be aware of it. So adverse childhood experiences are traumatic exposures and events that happen to us from womb to 18, starting with coming home to a parent that has mental illness, all the way to experiencing discrimination and racism, that gamut of them, 1 through 15. Again, 60% of the adults that we know right now have experienced at least one of those 15 categories, and that is on the low end. So they're bullies. By the time we become adults, they're invisible because what happens in childhood supposedly stays in childhood. And now we know that that's actually not true, because even though our mind has tried to forget about it or suppress it, our God-given bodies in his image were made to remember it in order to protect us. So they're really crappy experiences that a lot of children obviously didn't have control over because they were powerless. And if you are coming home to a caregiver or a parent or a foster home where those adversities are present in the environment, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, all of those things, if a child is coming home to those, it means that they're going to have to work extra hard as an adult to calm their nervous system and to be able to handle their emotions in the moment.
So basically you're saying these childhood traumas, even though they're happening in childhood, as an adult, you can still get triggered. Your nervous system can get triggered. And now you have high stress, right? You're dealing with cortisol, which then could trigger all the different chronic illnesses that stress affects.
Absolutely.
So what are
Go
some
ahead.
of the other points about like the study in terms of what they said the outcomes are for folks that they should be concerned about or cognizant of as an adult? Why they would even look to see if maybe they had some traumatic experiences as a child?
Great question. Some of the outcomes are grave. And because of that, I tell people, if you ask, you might now see me as the buzzkill, because it's the stuff that we don't really sign up to hear. Nobody really wants to hear that. Like, we don't really want bad news about that guy we're dating because we're really into him or whatever it is. It's like that bad news you really don't want to hear about. And a lot of times we don't learn stuff, unfortunately, because sometimes we may not just be ready to hear it. But some of the negative outcomes, turn on your local news and you will see them. School shootings, right? We want to associate the school shooting with the gun and the shooter and maybe blame his parents here or there. But truly, school shootings, church shootings, murders, domestic violence, killing your own children, you name it, we're probably seeing it on the breaking news at 6 o'clock. So when we're seeing those stories, some of the outcomes, whether it's disease related, violence related, crime related, I guarantee you, people who shoot people likely have ACEs. People who are obese, and again, this is not a blanket statement, likely experience childhood adversity. That's what the study says. I'm paraphrasing, right? The study started because they wanted to help women lose weight. And when they started digging into the questionnaires of the women who were a part of this study way back in the 1990s when Holyfield was biting off Mike Tyson's ear, this is how long it's been out. What was revealed to the doctors was, oh my goodness, these women that are here to lose weight, it turns out they all have something in common. And when I say all, it was like 80% of the women that were in this obesity study had something in common. They had been sexually abused as children. So eating became a safety mechanism for them. It became a protective mechanism for their bodies, because if I'm seen as unattractive, maybe this person won't attack me or abuse me anymore. So the only reason why we know about ACEs today was because some doctors wanted to help women lose weight. And lo and behold, what did they discover? That the women were eating the way they were eating because their body had remembered what had happened to them in childhood. If I may say, obesity is one of the ones, right? In America, you probably know this as a person who does the nutrition field, we have a problem with being overweight, and it's glorified, right? Some of the other side effects, when it comes to the conversation on diabetes, if you are a child and you leave home with if you are a child and you leave home with 4 or more of these categories of ACEs, and remember I told you it was 15 of them, you are 5 times more likely to be at risk for having diabetes than somebody who left home with none of those adversities.
Wow.
And what they try to tell us is, though, it's genetic. Well, heck yeah, it's genetic, because your mama was cussing at you, your daddy was cussing at you, your aunties was cussing at you, they was fighting, your grandmama and them was doing the same thing, and your great grandmama and them were doing the same thing. And again, if you happen to have brown skin, you might have just been born into slavery and were being controlled by violence. And so, yeah, it is genetic, right? And we now know, because of epigenetics, that our trauma gets wired onto our DNA, and it starts to give us traits, if you will, that were really just survival traits. So it's a gamut of stuff that not only deals with our health, whether it's obesity, heart disease is one of the main benefactors of having these childhood adversities. And when I say benefactor, I don't mean it in a good way. Cancer. All 4 of the grandparents that I met in my own life, like on my mom's side and my dad's side, including my mother and father, all died of a cancer. They each left this earth with double-digit adverse childhood experiences. Causation, correlation, right? I'm, again, not saying it's a blanket statement, but a lot of this is just so historical that it does start to feel like culture, or it does start to feel like, oh, that's just the way that family is. But the truth is, our bodies are doing exactly what they were patterned to do. And so, bringing this conversation up alongside diabetes helps us understand that it doesn't have to be genetic, right? Yes, it might take some time to undo a pattern that's been a part of our family's lineage for several generations, whatever that pattern may be, whether it's domestic violence, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, whatever that is. It may take some generations to break that pattern, but what are we waiting on? Why not? We know it took all these generations for us to get it so easily, so why not work equally as hard, especially as people of color who are most affected by this, to begin to break those patterns, to begin to make better choices about our eating today. We might not be able to change it for the rest of our life, but today, can I make a conscious choice about what I'm eating? Because I know if I had adverse childhood experiences, my body is going to be more attracted to things that are unhealthy to me. And then I'm going to blame myself for that, just thinking that it's poor decisions or I'm just abusing my free will. But when you have ACEs, do you really have free will? Because according to the study, you're more likely to be attracted to that stuff because it was a part of your pattern childhood, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It makes total sense. And I love that we're having this conversation because, like you said, there are people beating themselves up, struggling. Like, why is it that I cannot make this healthy choice? Like, so for my clients in particular, I talk a lot about raw foods. Raw foods take very little time to make. You literally buy mixed green salad, triple wash, you throw it in a bowl, you put your dressing on it, which could be very simple. But folks are like, why can't I do this? they keep falling into that unhealthy eating pattern. It is not lack of planning or lack of storing the foods in the kitchen. There's something psychological happening there. And sometimes when we can't see it and we can't really make sense of, like, why are we stuck in this pattern, these are some of the things we need to be looking at. Like, what are some of the traumatic experiences that happened in our childhood that just is keeping us stuck? So thank you to all of you joining us live. I see SB Wilson. Thank you so much for joining us in the chat. She says the list of 15 ACEs, is that on the CDC's website?
Great question. No. Short answer is no. If you want to know about all the 15 ACEs, you're going to have to dig a little bit, because CDC did one version and they stopped at 10 questions. And I do need to put a disclaimer out there that when the CDC did the original study, they studied a little bit over 17,000 people, again, back in the late 90s when Mike Tyson was biting off Holyfield's ear. Okay, I like to put that because it gives people a visual. I'm showing my age. And when they did it, they focused on 10 questions, a battery of questions, and then they narrowed it down to 10. But here's the kicker. When they first did the study, of those 17,000 people, a little bit over 400 of them were people of color. The rest were non-people of color. The rest of that 17,000, again, were middle class people who had health insurance and who lived in California. So if you can paint a picture of what that demographics might have looked like when they produced the data from that 17,000, and they said, oh, out of that 17,000 people, wow, 6 out of 10 of them, again, mostly Caucasian people, middle-class backgrounds, health insured people living in a very nice suburb of California. If 6 out of 10 of them had at least one, imagine if they did it over in Paramore and ran that same study. You can probably picture how astronomically different those numbers would be. So as a result, a community in Philadelphia who has a very high poverty, high crime, high nutrition desert parts of town, they decided to run the study after the CDC, and they expanded it so that it would be more in the image of the community that they served. And what they discovered, beyond the 10 questions that the CDC asked, they added 5 more on that were very common experiences for children. For example, one of the ones that got added on in the new study of the Philadelphia community that did this, they decided based on the outcomes that bullying is also something that activates the nervous system in a negative way. So children who are bullied are going to produce toxins in their body in response to their body trying to protect themselves. Children who end up in foster care, psychiatric placement, or even houselessness was added as an additional ACE in the later study. Not included in, if you think about it, these people had health insurance, so houselessness didn't come up for them. The other 3 that came up in the new research also included violent neighborhoods, nutrition desert, poverty, discrimination and racism, and I feel like I have my chart. Did I miss one? Bullying, houselessness, psychiatric care, foster care, racism, discrimination, poverty, violence, and foster care all ended up in the further research ACEs. Now, just because somebody hasn't published different categories, these are the ones that have an abundance of research to support that if these things happen in childhood, we must have interventions and support systems in place before they spiral out of control. Mm-hmm. So if people want to see the 15, they can visit acesmatter.org, and there's actually a quiz, a survey you can take, and you can answer those questions, and it'll email you back a copy of what your score was based on those 15 questions if you want to see them all in one place.
That's awesome. That's brilliant. Yeah, doing the actual test for yourself. I looked at some of the questions that they were asked in the original study, and I may have had one or something, so I didn't have much. But as you look at it, I think it's good to dive in and kind of see because some people don't present as obese necessarily, yet they're having issues of hormonal imbalance due to ACEs, right? Their default setting is like stuck on chronic stress. And so without knowing that, right, then you're just acting like everyone else when really your baseline lifestyle needs to be like completely around self-care, like
Yeah.
really taking care of your nervous system and prioritizing that, because you are susceptible, you're at higher risk, as Cendie, is pointing out. Like, you're at higher risk for all sorts of manifestations of hormonal imbalance, blood sugar dysregulation, inflammation in the body, due to having four or more of these ACEs.
Yep. Yep.
So I would love, I know we've talked a lot of negative, right? But I would love to know, like, in your work, have you seen any success stories where breaking these cycles has led to better long-term health outcomes?
Great question, Miss Samantha. And because I know you are a woman of the word, one of the first things that I noticed when you invited me to do this um, podcast was the date. And today is June the 13th. I didn't even register that it was Friday the 13th until I saw the news today. I was like, oh, it is Friday the 13th. One of my favorite scriptures since I've been on this journey comes from Ephesians 6:12, which was yesterday. And it talks about us not as humans, as flesh, being at war with flesh and blood, that the things that we battle against are the things that we can't see. We can't see what's going on the inside of us, right? We just know our bodies may act up sometimes. Right now in this room, there are things that are moving around that my naked eye cannot see. I know there's oxygen in here. I know there's other things moving around, right. So when you asked about success stories, I'm going to do a shameless plug for myself. And here's why. Today, Friday the 13th, when I saw the date of this live, it brought me to the verse that comes right after Ephesians 6:12, and it talks about, you better have your armor of God on, honey. You better have your armor of God on, honey, because they coming for you. Fast food places, they gonna be everywhere. Sugar is gonna be everywhere. Everything that is not raw, it's gonna be everywhere for you, right? The temptations is all around us. So as a person who's living with 14 and a half ACEs, I would have given myself 15. But there was times in our life that even though on paper we were technically homeless, we always had somewhere to sleep under a roof. My mom never let us sleep outside or in a car. There was always a friend or a family member. Otherwise, I would say I had all 15 ACEs. Yes, my mom stayed in a couple of relationships that were not safe, but she did it so that we wouldn't have to be homeless. So as a person that is sitting here with almost 100 perfect score, what the word revealed to me when I learned about ACEs in 2020 is that we are the solution, right? Like, I am the solution. And putting myself around other people who are vibrating or moving at a higher frequency, making different choices is key. It is a part of the armor. So the success stories do come when you have the awareness that it's not doomsday, right? Like, I'm not downplaying the experiences that we had to go through in childhood, but when you get in adulthood and you have this light bulb moment that, oh, it's nothing wrong with me, it's what happens to me. That's where the success story starts to take shape. And then now, because you don't have to go back to be a doctor to try to figure this out, you just need to tune into the right podcast. You just need to follow the right social media pages. You just need to have the right people in your circle. That's where the miracles start to occur. And so as a result of me as a civilian, somebody without a social work background, without any nutrition background, like, I went to school to be a teacher because I couldn't do nothing else, they told me. So knowing that now I have the privilege to learn stuff that will help me calm my nervous system. And I created a thing called the 10 antidotes to ACEs. And it's literally 10 things that if you experience four more childhood adversities, even one adversity, because one adversity could be bad, especially if it was cumulative and it kept happening, like sexual abuse could feel like, an adversity that could have been happening outside of your home, but your home life was perfect, but you went to church and so was doing whatever to you, right? if you have something that disrupted your nervous systems, you must investigate the 10 antidotes to ACEs and use that mindfully. So now, because I'm aware of it, Samantha, I'm not saying that I'm perfect with my eating, but I'm a lot more mindful of knowing that sometimes I need to fast, because I know I've watched the disease take over many of the people that are in the family I was born into. So having agency over what I can control, and
Mm-hmm.
also having compassion and empathy for myself and for other people who have gone down the rabbit hole of understanding ACE, is that a lot of the habits that we want to break are bigger than our goodwill. I mean, I'm sorry, are bigger than our will, meaning like we're trying to break a pattern that was necessary, kind of installed in us. So success stories come from people who go down this rabbit hole and look at this from and with an open mindset that I want to work through this trauma so that I can create space in my body to be able to receive all the mess that's going to happen, that's been happening in the world since Genesis. Like, that's where the success stories
Yeah.
come, when people really turn inside and realize, like, the more I hang on to this resentment and this hate and all the things that are bad that are happening in the world, the more I am letting something infiltrate my armor. So when I talk about put on the armor of God or whatever it is that you believe in, like those, there are things that we cannot see that are trying to influence our patterns of behavior to, in so many words, want us to stay on script, because the script was written for us to not change our behavior, right? We shift the script when we start to notice that a script was written for us to behave this way, and then we can start making conscious choices. And so, although not perfect, again, I'm a person with 14 and a half ACEs, and I met so many people that have ACEs that have just turned things around, and they did it, one, by becoming aware that this was bigger than them, that there was nothing wrong with them, that is what happened to them, and then putting themselves around people in support systems that are moving on the trajectory where they want to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It sounds like you're talking about building a village,
Yeah,
which
absolutely. Power the children. Yes,
I feel
absolutely.
like folks really struggle with this because, especially with the women that I serve, asking for support, asking for help, even if it's like calling someone that who likes to work out, they go for walks, and you're struggling to do it, like, oh, but they're going to think that I'm bothering them, all this kind of stuff. What kind of, so you mentioned too, like the antidotes, right? Where can folks find that? The
Great
antidote.
question. Acesmatter.org. So
Okay.
as I come up with things that are downloaded to me, my job is to simplify the science so that it's not intimidating for the civilians like myself. Like, I could tell people anybody can do this, even if you don't read or don't have the vernacular that some of the doctors and researchers have. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't be in the conversation. So I created a very simple visual that can be found on acesmatter.org under the events section. And we're actually having a summit coming up in October where we're going to bring people with ACEs and without ACEs together for a weekend of events where people actually get to experience the antidotes real time. So people are going to be coming in talking to us about the importance of movement. Maybe you're not ready for a gym membership, but the importance of movement, and movement in nature. All right, those are double doses of things that we can do, especially for those who left home with a lot of adversities, to begin to calm our nervous system. A calm nervous system will motivate you to want to go walk. A calm nervous system will motivate you to want to eat right, to motivate. I mean, even again, I tell people, if we could get into the habit of thinking that we're having to change a behavior for the rest of our life, that's really what shuts the brain down. Like, oh, that's just too much. I'm not going to do it. What if you just did it today? What if you just did it for the next 5 minutes? We'll worry about tomorrow, but what if you just did it today, right? And then if
Mm-hmm.
you get through the day, do it again tomorrow, right? But the idea too, because some people may have those BS systems, and when I say BS, I mean belief systems of, oh, they're going to think I'm getting on their nerves, right? We got to listen to whose voice is that is saying that, because that might be a voice from your childhood, or that might be one of those Ephesians 6:12 unseen things that we let get up in our past our armor, that's encouraging us not to eat right or encouraging us not to go do that walk. So just being real mindful of whose voice did I hear when I thought that that person's going to think that I'm getting on their nerves if I call them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I say, listen, if you get on it, put the onus on them to tell you, hey, you're getting on my nerves. And
Don't do
let
the work
that
for
not
them.
bother you. Put on that
Yeah.
shield around you. It's okay. But having that support system, because I was listening to, something on social media. It was like a clip from Trevor Noah's podcast where he talked about, he highlighted, which is something I think all of us are noticing, is that we have moved away from community, and the system probably has pulled us away from the community. I don't know what's happening, because we have a loneliness epidemic going on, and how that manifested could be a whole series of things, but the capitalistic system has basically told us that we need to now buy the community, right? So we buy the friends, and all this stuff, all the people that was your support system for a healthy, a healthy body, healthy nutrition, exercise, good advice, love, compassion, all these things, we're now paying for it. And so people who are, financially don't have the resources, as you mentioned, in the original study, you have all these people who have the financial resources, they have insurance and all this stuff, but then you have this group of people that they don't have it. And so they're just left struggling, right? They don't have the community. They don't have the money to buy the community. And so you have all these things that, historically, we weren't really dealing with a lot of these mental, emotional, social deficits that we're dealing with right now. So our nervous system is having to contend with something quite new, a new type of stressor that is very much chronic, because we're waking up to it every single day feeling like this lack. SB Wilson said, wow, I never looked at those verses like that. I appreciate that view. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us to church. I know
Church, honey.
the Bible has really helped me. And I think tapping into your spirituality, whatever that may be, maybe if you're not Christian, if you're Muslim or something else, whatever it is, but connecting to something bigger than yourself, because that we see based on, evidence, studies, that this really helps people with their longevity. And part of that is, having a really calm nervous system, a strong immune system, which is predicated upon keeping stress levels down. So thank you so much for mentioning that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
So how can people get involved with ACEs Matter? You mentioned the summit that's coming up. There's a link for that in the description wherever you're watching. Definitely make sure to check out those links so you can sign up. Tell us more about how folks can get involved.
I would say volunteer. You cannot imagine what it does for your nervous system when you donate your time. If you know that you've got to go home or to work and it's chaos, volunteer your time for things that are not so chaotic, right? It's not the end all be all, but it is a solution and an opportunity to have a respite from chaos, right? Even if it's just an hour or 2 hours, you are now you are growing new neurons in your network when you experience new things, and especially if you're experiencing new things with people who might who might be less privileged than you. Even if you on the struggle bus and you go volunteer, you'd be like, right? It does something neurologically for you, and it starts to create new patterns. And the more you do that, the more you strengthen the possibilities of what can be done, even when you're in survival mode, even if you're in financial survival mode. You cannot, I don't know how some people don't really care for this statement, but you hear it often, people saying pour from an empty cup, right? Why your cup got to be empty, right? But again, I tell you, volunteer is one thing because it opens up space. It just helps you have more space for the stuff that you're going through. So volunteer is my first recommendation. And of course, signing up to get our newsletter content so that you can keep up whenever we're having. Most of our events are complimentary. And then attending the October Summit is the soonest one that we have that's going to be open to the public, but we are doing 4 events over 3 days, and all of them involve different types of antidotes to ACEs, from eating right to movement to laughter. One of the events, we know laughter is an uncontrollable human response, especially when something is really funny. That is such a gift from God, to just be able to laugh, even when things don't feel like, it's worth laughing about. But we're doing a comedy show, and people with lived adversities are turning their pain into purpose, and they're getting outside of their comfort zone, facing their fears in front of the public, and they're going to take a microphone. These are not like Kevin Hart comics. These are people who had regular adversity, wanted to do something about it, and says, I'm gonna get on stage and I'm gonna tell my story. So, join us, whether it's the comedy show, the tennis event, or coming to the summit to hear from different people. Build your tribe of people that are all doing the work. And again, our parents did the best that they could with the information that they had. We are in a different time now. We have access to some of this stuff that our parents and our ancestors did not have access to. I'm not making excuses for the systemic challenges that are still here. But if we truly want to take back control, the solution starts with us and just what we do with our 24 hours in a day. So sign up, volunteer, register for some of those free events. Everything can be found on acesmatter.org. And then follow us on our social pages to keep up with, again, all of us are civilians. I say civilians like very loosely. Like, we are people who did not come from this background that realized, oh my goodness, my childhood was kind of wretched. But I want to make 6 figures and I can't get it, so it's just really helpful. The more you can get involved in these conversations, because you'll just see yourself growing and shifting realities as you understand the patterns from your childhood. And, taking classes is one way.
Yes, I love that. You're talking about basically practicing self-care and building community around you, being around people of like mind who are passionate and focused on a mission, right? When your life has purpose, you give your life more meaning, right? You have the will to live, and that helps to, skyrocket everything else that you're trying to achieve on your wellness journey. So Cendie, thank
Absolutely.
you so much
Thank
for
you.
this conversation. I know a lot of people's minds are blown, like they haven't even heard of ACEs before. A lot of people have not heard of ACEs before, and this study and the 17,000 number just shows how serious we need to take it, because that's a large scale study. Like, nobody can dispute the outcomes when you're looking at that many people, so thank you so much for bringing this to light, and your work is truly changing lives. I appreciate your time that you've taken to share this. And for those of you watching, if you found this discussion valuable, please share this with your community. Definitely your healthcare practitioner, share that with them. I think it's important for all healthcare practitioners to be aware of some of the things that may be happening with their patients that may not fully present themselves, at face value, right? We need to kind of dig a little more, which is why I love coaching, because I get to spend more time with people. I'm not stuck in that insurance paradigm of only 7 minutes or whatever that physicians have. I get to spend more time so I can see what's going on, and we could get to the root of the issue. But everyone needs to be aware, right, of what's happening in our communities. So make sure you share this, because healing generational trauma starts with awareness and action. Okay? So it's behooves all of us, right, to make sure that we make that a primary focus of our life's mission, of what we're doing with it for ourselves, within our family, and within our community. Cendie, is there anywhere else you want people to look to find you online on the interwebs?
If they are LinkedIn users, social media is one of the things that I've created a boundary for myself around. However, I do spend a lot of time being a vessel on LinkedIn, because that's a business professional community that A, employ people with ACEs, and B, maybe company owners, CEOs with ACEs themselves. And I think the more of us that learn about ACEs, the more compassion we can create for other people, because you never know what people are going through and you never know what they've been through. And so LinkedIn is a place where I do my best work of sharing the stuff that I'm unpacking as I learn, I unpack it and share it as I go. And LinkedIn is the place that I normally do that. So please follow me on LinkedIn. And I have a very unique spell name, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me.
Yes. And all her information is in the description wherever you're watching this video. So thank you for joining live. Thank you, Cendie, so much. And
Thank
with
you.
that, have a great, blessed weekend. Take care.